Back. We have 45 minutes now to pick up on many of the points that David King made very clear. Gloom is not the word. We have to be positive, pragmatic, but also view with enormous foreboding the kind of scale of what has to be done. What we want to do in this next session is to try and work out how business is adapting to it. Personal comment here, it seems many business are now adapting very quickly and are fully aware of the enormity of what has to be done. The trouble is, the scale of it is enormous, as we've just heard from David King. What I'd like to do for each of the three guests I have with me so far, I'm hoping a fourth will join us. I'd like to, in literally half a minute, if I could, get a view from you as to whether things are now moving in the right direction at the pace and the speed that is now necessary, with the scale, the nimbleness, agility, and commitment. Can I go to Deloitte first of all, because Scott, you actually spend your time trying to galvanize business, your partners, as much as anything else. Can you give me, first of all, tell us what you do now in Deloitte, and secondly, your view, literally in about 45 seconds, no more please, of where we're at and what the scale is like.
Yes. Hi, Nick. Delighted to be with you. My role is I am the U.S. leader for sustainability and climate change as part of our Office of the CEO. There are a couple of things I do. I look after our own commitments in terms of getting to net zero. And then exactly as you said, I lead our efforts across our audit and assurance business, our advisory business, our consulting business, and our tax business in the United States. To answer your question, we're beginning to move in the right direction, but the pace is far from where it needs to be. And as we'll get into this discussion, I want to expand on sort of what we think is needed. And we believe it's sort of an overall kind of systems approach, a system of systems approach, and look forward to digging in deeper as we go further in this conversation.
Thanks, Scott. Let me go to Ilham. Welcome, Ilham Kadri from Solvay. You've been chief executive for the last 2 years. Just pick up on that, your assessment in your annual report recently. You were very clear and very positive about the way you believed your company, 24,000 people, has really adapted in the last certainly year because of COVID. But what's your assessment on the climate emergency and sustainability and how that's been addressed at the moment?
Well, thank you for having me. You know, it's a great pleasure to share the floor with this prestigious panel and my colleagues here. Well, listen, at Solvay, we've been committed to the climate, right, for many years, but last year was a tipping, point for us. So we joined the Paris Agreement in February 2020. Our trajectory in greenhouse gas emissions cuts was minus 0.8% between 14 and 18. And to join Paris, we needed 2% per annum. And in 19 and 20, we did 2x Paris. So when you mobilize your teams, when it impacts the pocket, so our sustainability agenda called Solvay One Planet impacts my own compensation, variable compensation 10%, and the whole company bonus pay. So we are very serious about that. And actually we extended it from climate only to resources preservation and better life, because you have to be good for the people, the planet, and the profit. So that's for us very important. We joined the SBTI, the Science Based Targets Initiatives, in October last year, because we believe it has to be science-based. And obviously we have also an internal methodology to measure our progress, and we publish it, including joining the International Business Council from the World Economic Forum.
All right. And Ilham, am I reading your documentation correct, that you're aiming to reduce CO2 by 26%? Under the SBTI. All right, we'll come back to that in a moment. Eckart von Klaeden, let's go to Germany. Welcome. You're a little low in your screen. If you're able to tip it forward a little bit so we can see a little bit more of you. Welcome. I don't know where you are in Germany, but welcome. You're joining us from Daimler, where you're a vice president. Again, in about 30, if you're able to hear what I was saying at the beginning, and I was quoting in the previous session also the very, very serious warnings from the G7 on Sunday, from NATO on Monday, and also from the International Energy Agency, saying that this is the kind of the worst problem that humankind has ever faced. Eckart von Klaeden, your view from Daimler about how much this is now being tackled head on with the agility and nimbleness that is needed.
Yeah, I fully share this analysis, because I also would say, and this is also the conviction of our company, that climate change and climate protection is the challenge and the task of our times, and everyone has to contribute to this. And our goal for our company, and we are also a member of the Science Based Target Initiative and several other business initiatives to come to carbon neutrality, was, I have to say, to be carbon neutral in 2039 with the Agenda 2039. But we know that we will sharpen this. And we are quite sure that with the technologies we do now have in our portfolio, mainly with battery electric cars, we can reach this faster than expected even some months ago.
All right. Well, what I want to ask all of you is how the public is accepting this, because that's the thing that Professor Sir David King made clear, that the public is still struggling to know what on earth to do about this. Philippe, nice to see you again. We spoke this time last year. Look at what's happened. Enormous. You're from ExxonMobil, the president for Europe. What's your assessment as to where things are going now and where things are at, and whether there is enough of nimbleness, agility, and frankly, willing to be frank about the scale of what we're facing?
Well, Nik, thanks for the opportunity and really glad to be back. I would start by saying that the direction of travel is clear. 190 countries have signed the Paris Agreement. The US is back in the agreement. We're supporting that agreement. And the ambition is getting to net zero as soon as feasible. I think the question is not where we are going, but how are we going there? What is the pathway? What are the pathways? And I think Bill Gates summarizes it very well in his book, the How to Avoid a Climate Disaster book, the solutions we have and the breakthroughs we need. And I think that's a summary of how we're going to get there. When I look at how we're approaching that at ExxonMobil, it's about reducing our own emissions, helping our customers reduce theirs, engaging in climate policy. And I think we'll need to talk about that, because climate policies will play a key role in accelerating the energy transition. And then, absolutely key, developing and deploying scalable technology solutions. And there is a lot of opportunities, but we need acceleration. And I'll be happy to talk more about how we're approaching that and what we're doing in the technology front.
I was very struck in the discussion we had a few days ago when you talked about oil now being a depletion business. And secondly, current solutions will not get us to net zero. That is clear from your point of view, from the ExxonMobil point of view, is it?
And I would say it's not my point of view. There are many people who see it the same way. In fact, when you look at all the studies, all the models, all the scenarios, they basically say that the solutions we have today, those which are commercially demonstrated, will enable us to reduce emissions by about 50% of what's needed. The other 50% will come from innovations that are either at the pilot stage or the early development stage. They are not being deployed yet. And so it's absolutely critical that we work on this other half now, and that we bring this innovation and deploy this innovation quickly. For us, the focus is on three key sectors, three hard to decarbonate sectors: the heavy duty transportation, commercial transportation, industry, and power generation. Three sectors we know very well because they represent 80% of oil and gas demand today. And the question is, how do we bring our capabilities, our expertise to deliver those solutions to those sectors? And it's about technologies like carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, second and third generation biofuels, or more efficient processes. But as you said, we cannot forget that millions of people rely on our products today. Energy is at the heart of the prosperity we developed nations enjoy every day, and that developing nations aspire to. And oil has been a depletion and extraction business since the beginning. We're basically taking stuff out of the ground, and then we have to move on to the next resource, which is why, in order to meet that demand, we need to continue to invest. And that's what every model would say.
Right, we'll come on to that in a moment. If I may, Ilham, but I want to go to Scott in a moment. You say very clearly in your 10 highlights of 2020, and I'm reading here, number one, we are now engaging with our customers and suppliers to reduce emissions throughout the value chain. I'd like to hear more about that in a moment. But Scott, when you look at your clients, your partners, your customers, and those you're dealing with, what is still the blockage in their minds and their work patterns and their work intentions and their plans, which means they're still finding it difficult to grip the enormity of what has to be done, whether on the financial, the supply chain side, or whatever? What are the big obstacles that still have to be overcome?
Yeah, so ultimately what you're talking about is a massive systems problem. The issue today is, as an individual consumer, you can make certain green choices. An individual organization and company, we're seeing all of these pronouncements. They're all well-intended. They're trying to do the right thing, but they're insufficient. And the reason they're insufficient is we need to decarbonize the energy system as fast as possible. We need to get to clean, renewable energy. In industry, we have to decrease the energy intensity of what it takes to produce and to make things and process industries in terms of mobility. So what you've got are these other systems in terms of production, mobility, the food system, that are all highly dependent on this decarbonization of the energy system. And our argument is that they have to move somewhat in lockstep in parallel. We can't wait for sort of a sequential serial approach to getting there. And to some extent, it's a little bit the question you were alluding to. It's how do we tip some of these markets faster? The technology for electric vehicles exists. The technology for recharging exists. But today we're still only selling 2% of vehicles. It's growing, right? We still have 1 billion ICE engines on the road today. So we need to accelerate that. And if we have any chance of getting to the Paris Accords, this next decade is absolutely the key period, because the carbon we emit, we're not likely to be able to take it back, right? And so therefore, we have to move forward on the things we can move forward on. And Philippe is right to this extent that there are technologies we need to invest in, and we need to scale them as quickly as possible, but we can't wait and assume that they will be the lifesaver. Companies need to institute sustainable operating practices as fast as possible. And ultimately, you're going to see, as Ilham has just referenced, a massive transformation of enterprises in terms of the fundamental business models of how they're operating to succeed in a low carbon future.
Is there a will to collaborate? Because Fatih Birol, in his IEA report of a month ago, says it requires strong, credible policy actions from governments underpinned by much greater international cooperation.
I think there is. I think it isn't a question of willingness, it's a question of how. We're talking about moving all of those systems plus a financial system that's now being measured in terms of ESG and the trillions of dollars in asset management. You're looking at the emergence of new carbon credit markets, which will provide capital and incent investment. You've got governments now trying to move. But how do you get, and then you've got the tech players that are building digital tools that allow us to be much less energy intensive in the things that we're doing. But we're still struggling to sort of coordinate and to synchronize and to build that. So all of these studies that are out there, the Princeton one, the IEA study, there are several of them that are kind of, how do you get to net zero by 2050? They're really helpful, because what they are different scenarios that give us insights into what those pathways are. But we're going to have to move relatively quickly from sort of studying them as blueprints to actually acting upon them.
Well, let me pick up with Ilham if I can, because Ilham, I'm quoting from your own declarations on your website. We bond people, ideas, and elements to reinvent progress. And you talk about innovative solutions and the One Planet program. Now, this is not about an advert for Solvay, but what would be useful, and certainly in our work, and probably you as well at Deloitte, Scott, many leaders are inspired by hearing the successes of others. What have you discovered about the ability of your staff, your employees, and your customers to change the way they think in a way which you are saying they have managed to do, certainly during the COVID crisis, and therefore are preparing themselves better for the enormity of the kind of lifestyle changes they're going to have to make?
Yeah, it's a fabulous question, Nick. And the bonding is not only amongst our own employees. We cannot do it alone. It's with our customers, with suppliers, because that's the scope 3, the SBTi target. Let me give you an example. One of our largest customers and main smart device producer in the US requires that the power consumed in our manufacturing processes come from renewable sources. And we became the second largest solar farmer in South Carolina, right? We have now 250,000 solar panels cover an area as large as 500 soccer fields. And 3 business groups in the US run 100% solar electricity in the US since January 2021. We did it in the middle of the crisis, right? So, this COVID-19 has been stress testing us as leaders and companies. And by the way, the Solvay One Planet, and we joined the Paris Agreement in February last year, so it's very new. And look what we've done. We did 2x Paris, including committing to exit coal, which has been a primary energy for Solvay, and we are a 160 years old company. And we have now a business case in Rheinberg in Germany, and thanks to the German authorities who are talking about the German Marshall Funding for the US, they helped us, and we built an ecosystem, a circular one, to replace coal with wood waste, wood chips waste.
But what obstacles, what difficulties are you facing? It's all very well talking about success. What are the things that are getting in the way of an even faster adaptation and mitigation?
For example, in this case in Germany, it took us 2 years. We could have done it faster, but we needed to create an ecosystem to collect waste. Huh? I cannot shut down my manufacturing assets, right? So if you want to exit coal, I need to find a renewable energy and alternative energy to use. So it's either waste, and is there a local waste market? Is there someone who can support me? So I need a supplier. I'm not a waste collector and manager. And in this case, we created jobs around waste collection, and the company now goes 100 kilometers far away from the plant, collecting wood waste from industrial, residential, and using it as an energy. Now, if you go to another coal plant, you need another alternative energy. So the reality, Nik, is that we don't have all the solutions. We committed to exit coal by 2030. We have a roadmap, 28 projects, which are worth almost 2 million tons of CO2 per annum. But in Bulgaria, for example, we don't have alternative energies to replace coal. So we need the public, supports, public authorities, private public investments and funding to allow us to find those renewable energies. We are in EV batteries, right? So all what we see in EV is just great. There has been a tipping point last year. We sold more EV batteries than in our history last year, or membranes for batteries. But the green hydrogen is another, cleaner energy. Between now and 2030, there will be no zero, or net carbon, or decarbonized economy and net zero without, for example, the green hydrogen, which we need it at scale and at competitive cost.
So quickly, Ilham, can I say that what needs to be done, but there's still a limit to the speed at which you can do it, which is going to act as in its own way as a bit of an anchor chain on the speed at which net zero can be implemented. Is that
indeed? We need speed, we need infrastructure, we need incentive to make it happen, because it has to be profitable. There is a carbon price in Europe. There is less of carbon pricing in other regions. So we need harmonization, because if not, you will have a carbon leakage, and you will have innovation leakage as well. So that's harmonization, and I'm encouraged by the Biden administration joining Paris agreements back and having these US-Europe climate discussions is so critical for global companies like ours.
Let me go to Eckart, if I may, because Eckart, you bring at least two skills to this panel. You were, of course, a politician. And I'd like to sort of open this up to all four of you and ask about how you get the public on board. And I'm just wondering, you worked in the Chancellery and so on, about how this can be sold politically by politicians who need to get re-elected every 4 years, certainly in Germany, when actually what is happening is an expectation that many people are going to have to change their lives significantly. So you come to the table both from Daimler, but also with that political experience. What's your feeling about how this can be managed successfully? And then I'll come to Philippe as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think there are 4 points important for the political success of climate protection policy, because at the end, in a democracy, but even in other political systems, you need the support of the people at the end for being successful. And I would say there are four, as I said, four ingredients for that, prerequisites. The first, of course, is an ambitious and reliable regulation. Ambitious, of course, it has to meet the targets. It has to show a clear path to climate neutrality. On the other hand, it has to be reliable, that companies and other players can adjust their research and development, their production, their products, their services to this regulation. The second thing is you have to be open for technology, for solutions. And here I would say is maybe the hardest point, the most difficult point in Germany, that too many people are reluctant on new technologies. And my position is that we are not, we cannot afford to dispense any technology to fight climate change. The third point is that you need market economy tools. So in my view, the best, of course, is an emission trading system, but even a taxation on CO2 and other climate gases would be helpful. But I would say in this regard, a market system that really makes CO2 reduction efficient and is a stimulus for new technologies to develop, to avoid, or even to take it out of the atmosphere is very, very important. And the third and the fourth one is you need it with economic success, so that also in social terms it is accepted by the people. And here there is a great study by the German Economic Council from 2019, who really says that many tools we are taking now for protecting climate change are too nitty-gritty, and we are missing really the big points I already have mentioned. So if you are, you can do it. I'm very convinced you can do this with economic success. And so climate protection and economic success doesn't exclude each other. It can, it will be comprehensive and it can advance each other, but you really have then to have the right decisions. And if I may add something regarding the automotive industry, I think there are also what Ilham said, three main points. I always talk about the magic triangle, and it's the energy mix. So if you do not have electric energy coming from climate neutral sources, then of course it does not make any sense. So the energy mix has to become greener and greener. The second, of course, are the products. This is fully our responsibility. And in my view, and not only my view, the real bottleneck today is infrastructure. And especially in Europe, where you see that the infrastructure, and this is not only the infrastructure for charging, it is the grids, it's the power plants, it's a infrastructure in the broader sense. And if you see, for instance, the lack of ambition in Europe, especially in the east and in the south and the southeast, there are only a few member states now which are really investing in infrastructure. And if you want to meet the ambitious goals of the Commission, then you really need, and here again, smart and ambitious regulation that also brings the other member states at the table.
Well, just before I go to Philippe, there, I mean, you're lucky. You're a former politician. You don't have to run for re-election in September. And obviously, we know that the Greens have been doing, although they're pushing back a bit at the moment, they've been doing very well in the polls. But what I'm trying to get to as well, and including Philippe in this, is what is the role of the public in this? Could it be that the political class is underestimating the willingness now and the expectations now of the public for things to move much faster, whether in Germany or elsewhere? This is for Eckart, please.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I think it's really the way you're approaching this. If you combine climate change policy with several other goals some political forces may have for decades, so equalization or what else, then of course you are. It could happen that you're over ambitious and then you fail. So I think it is not the main task of politicians to educate the people. It is the main task of them to convince them, and the better you combine, as I said, economic success, saving jobs and creating new ones, and not only in speeches, but that you really can prove this, that the people see this, and if it comes along with products and services people want, and do not only have as the only choice because all the other things are prohibited, then you convince the people. And but politicians who believe more in prohibitions and less in market economic stimuli, they will fail, I think, with this, and they will lose the support of the people.
Well, that's a real alert, isn't it? And I'm being driven here by one of the questions sent in. What's the most important hurdle that business thinks political decision makers need to overcome to move faster towards decarbonizing the global economy? So please bear that in mind. Philippe, thanks for your patience, but I'm coming back to you because in the end, you've experienced at ExxonMobil in the last 3 weeks a very interesting pushback, particularly from the big pension funds, advisory services, and the small hedge fund. And I'm using that not to give you a hard time, but really to underscore that there is a significant change in the way the firmament in which we are considering all these issues is changing, and it's changing at very high speed. And 3 new directors are on the board, pushed through. Now, I'm using that as one example. How is ExxonMobil wanting to now handle this, realizing that there is now real pressure, not just from the public and the shareholders, but also the stakeholders out there who are worried about what companies like yours have been doing?
I think very good question. And as I said, the direction of travel is very clear for everyone. We know where we're going. The question is how. And if I come to your question about what does it take to accelerate the transition, and what is the expectation of the public, and how can we work with the policymakers? I think the public expect results. They want to see tangible projects, tangible results. And when we look at what will it take to accelerate those, we see 3 fundamentals that need to be in place. The first one is that the technologies are as affordable as possible, those that are needed to close the gap all the way to net zero. I think there is in general good support from everyone to invest in R&D and lower the cost of those low carbon solutions that are absolutely required. The second one, Eckart said it very well. We need infrastructure, and we need to realize that as part of this transformation, we will either have to transform and reuse what we have or create new, like new power line that connect countries, like hydrogen networks, like CO2 network, energy storage. All this will be critical. And this will come at a cost. So society will have to come up to the realization, yes, this is a major transformation. It's not going to come for free. The third one is the regulatory framework, which was mentioned a few times. We talked about carbon price. That's a good example of a regulatory framework that would support and accelerate change. When we look at it as an investor, what is it that is needed is low carbon solutions that are enabled by basically investable projects. Make sure the business case exists through either incentives, which is usually the best way to go, and which can be also by putting a price on carbon on the traditional forms of energy, and building this externally cost of emissions. Emissions have a cost. They should be in the price of the emissions when they happen. I wanted to use one example, probably one example of what can be done, what industry can do, and what needs to be done through collaboration. It is this project that we proposed to the US government, the Biden administration, President Biden, a few months ago, to create a carbon capture and storage innovation zone in the Houston Ship Channel. It's the deployment at scale of a technology, CCS, that is broadly recognized as one that is required to get to net zero. I mean, that's one that also would require political will to make sure this one is brought to bear. Our plan for the Houston CCS hub has the potential to capture 50 million tons a year in 2030, 100 million tons per year by 2040. This is the kind of bold idea that could make a difference and will be visible. It is a collaboration. I think the word was mentioned, but it's absolutely required. The objective is to bring together 50 different companies and a broad range of industries together with local, state, and federal governments, think tanks, and academics to deliver this game-changing project. And key to success will be the acceptance from the local public, the local constituencies. If I were to add just 2 data points, 100 million ton per year is the same order of magnitude of the total Belgium emissions today, same order of magnitude. That's what a kind of a bold project could deliver. The other one is in the Gulf alone, in the US Gulf, there is enough CO2 storage capacity to safely and permanently store about 500 billion tons of CO2 offshore. US emissions are 5 billion tons. That's equivalent to 100 years of US emissions. So some solutions exist. They just need to be enabled. And they're not just in the US.
But Philippe, are you recognizing now, particularly after what happened at the board meeting 3 weeks ago and what's happened with the Dutch case, where a Dutch judge decided that there was an abuse of human rights and Shell have got to reduce their emissions by a staggering 45% in 9 years? Do you feel that the sands are shifting and the way you do business has got to change significantly? When I read the IEA report, quote, no new oil and natural gas fields are needed in the net zero pathway. In other words, do you feel the water's closing in on you at the moment?
I think that the IEA report, Scott mentioned it, it's one of those scenarios which are very important because they help understand what it would take. And in that same report, which is a 200-page report, they also say, but by the way, and that was kind of the comment I was making, we need $8 trillion to continue to meet society's needs with oil and gas as we go through the transition. It also says half of the emissions will be reduced thanks to innovation that is still at the early stage of development and deployment. This is also things we're working on. And I think the message is clear. We need to work on those things. And that's what we're doing. And the recent example, this bold game-changing idea that is being proposed and we're actively working on is a good example of that.
Now, I'm not asking you to dominate the questions here, but I have a question here, which is building on my last question. Why did Exxon try to block alternative energy experts from joining its board in most recent board elections? In other words, there is a public issue there of which Exxon Mobil is, if you like, the public face of at the moment. And then I'll open it up to others. But just that one question, has that really is that going to lead to big change in thinking in Exxon Mobil?
You know, alternative energy is something we definitely recognize as being part of the solution needed. We're the first ones to say wind and solar are part of the solution. They will play a very important role. They just need to be complemented with other things. And we can't forget that economies today rely on oil and gas, and we need to supply those customers until those new solutions are in. We're focusing and investing tremendously on technology to close those gaps I mentioned, in commercial transportation, in power, in industry. That's what we have been working on. And we're actively communicating on that because we think those are the important things a company like us can do, building on our core competencies and on the skills we can bring to this challenge of the energy transition.
Thank you. We got 10 minutes to run. And what I'd like to do is get a consensus emerging here from all four of you. Coming back to you, Scott, because you're lucky in many ways because you have both a helicopter view and a granular view of where companies are struggling or companies are really moving forward despite the financial risks and other risks. Others are struggling with liquidity because of COVID, et cetera, et cetera. What is your feeling about how rapidly this is going to move? Because certainly when you listen to Mark Carney and other people like that, there is that feeling that in many ways, what we're seeing now is quite extraordinary. The speed of change, even if it's not on the scale that's needed, the speed of change is really quite dramatic, whether COP26 were to happen or not.
Yeah, well, the discussion you just was sort of eliciting and having, there are tensions. There are massive sets of tensions here that ultimately need to be broken, right? We're talking about hard to abate sectors with legacy incumbents that are a century old in many instances with massive capital investment. And we're asking them to move very quickly. And unlike, by the way, the digital revolution, this isn't going to be upended by two people in a garage coming up with great technology, right? We're talking about these very complex systems. I think what's really needed is stability. Like we need to actually come up with a view that one of these pathways or one of these plans has the elements, and these are the things we can do now. And
is that achievable? Is that achievable, Scott? Stability?
Well, it's necessary. I don't have Eckart's experience in government and all that stakeholder management to confidently say it's doable. I'm optimistic and hopeful. I think there is this universal recognition, but now we're going to have to do things in very non-traditional, unconventional ways. And the challenge is that it will affect the bottom line for some companies. It will improve market opportunities for others. But I don't think you've seen anything that has been as dramatic in terms of what this is. And there's the difference between this is there's a time element. We're trying to run against the clock that none of us control, but we can see, using science-based targets and scientists, we know what we're up against in terms of the IPCC says, look, we've got to cut our carbon emissions by half between now and 2030. The Secretary General of the UN announced a few weeks ago, we've cut less than 1%, right? We're not even close. We got to cut it again between 2030 and 2040 by half, and 2040 to 2050. So the sense of urgency, I think people are feeling, there's enormous pressure in terms of regulation. That's going to continue, or from the financial markets that will punish or reward those that are making the transition. You've got consumers at the other end that are voting with their feet in terms of the things that they buy. Employees, we have 120,000 employees in the United States that are professionals that work with clients basically across every sector. And, we owe it to them to help them figure out how they can be the best consultant and advisor and the solution creator and ecosystem architect, and getting the financial community aligned and government aligned, and sort of try to help bring collective action to what is a absolute sort of planetary collective problem. And one last point that I think is really critical that we haven't talked about, and that is we have to talk about climate equity and climate justice. A lot of the challenges we're seeing on the planet today are directly derived from what's happening in terms of our environment.
We are going to be talking about that in the next session, Scott. So that's already been factored in. But maybe can I go to Ilham and also Eckhart on this? Ilham, help us understand from your experience inside the company, picking up on that, how you can get collective action, how you can get a greater ambitious regulation to address this kind of thing. Because speed, as Scott has just said, time is of the essence here. And I'm going to come to you and then to Eckhart as well.
Well, listen, I think from our perspective, as Solvay One Planet, we decided to take a holistic approach to preserving the planet. So this is climate, but resources and people.
But is there really a recognition? In my mind, is there really a recognition? I hear what you're saying. Well, saving the planet. Do you think that's understood?
Well, you just, requested external rights about what's going on. I think our investors, they want it. Our employees want it. We are parents and leaders, and the sense of urgency, I'm not going to talk again about the facts. Spots talked about them. But I think we call for standards conversions and harmonization. It's not easy, we need ambitious innovation policies. Look at the Green Deal. We encourage EV uptake and it's happening, but we need to look at the entire life cycle policies. And there are fundamental differences. We didn't talk about them, Nik, between the United States and Europe and China, just on carbon pricing. I mean, when I joined the company in Europe, 2019, carbon pricing was 20-ish, and now it's 50, right? And in the US, there is non-federal carbon pricing, and China decided to do something, and it's around 5 to 10 euro at best. So it's striking in the US it's striking to see that European industrials are supportive of the cap and trade systems, the famous ETS, while US industrials are split on the usefulness of the carbon pricing. So I do hope that honest feedback, like what we've done in Rheinberg and exiting coal, can create momentum and the right policies. We need to move to this economy-wide carbon pricing, because if not, you are not going to get a level playing field, and CO2 prices differences, amongst other things, can create huge competitiveness gaps.
Yes, indeed. One of the questions was about how far are we from the time when transatlantic partners can announce that technologies they develop will be common technologies available to any country or business. Eckart, can you help us understand what you're doing in the supply chain, particularly Daimler? You have enormous supply chains. It's becoming more problematic for other geopolitical reasons as much as anything else. But how much is that acting as an inspiration for innovation and change? How much is that acting as an obstacle, but simply because of the practical difficulties being faced? I don't think it's say a Daimler, but it's in some companies there are shortages of chips at the moment, and therefore factories are going on short time. So it's not just about sustainability; it's about sustaining the supply chain.
Exactly, and of course it has to be clear that in the short term, production and the products we get from our suppliers will become more expensive. And this is something we have to accept, and we do accept. And in our contracts we have with our suppliers, we're trying as much as we can, committing them also to climate neutrality. And this is one thing. The other thing is, of course, we are able to buy, for instance, green steel. We have the new factory 56 in Sindelfingen. This is the first top-notch, top-of-the-art, state-of-the-art factory, carbon neutral. We will have our whole production in 2022 next year carbon neutral. So we are making tremendous success. But of course, it's an issue that we have to line our contracts with our suppliers more or less every day.
Are they bending? Are they being flexible? Do they realize the new reality, your suppliers?
I think they do. They do, and many, I would say more than 90% of them do this. If we have discussions with them, of course, it's about the technology. Because there are some suppliers who believe that, for instance, the combustion engine could stay longer if we had more synthetic fuels, and I would say, yeah, yes, that's the truth. But that's the truth. But unfortunately, we do not have them, so we cannot put our burden on the shoulders of others. We have to do to decarbonize our own products, our own production. And but all in all, I would say yes. The main suppliers understand the challenge and want to go the way with us.
All right. Well, look, thanks all four of you for your very frank responses. Much appreciated. I'm sorry to actually have to bring it to an end, but we are going to be discussing, Scott, I'm not going to be doing it, Clayton Eldon is going to be doing it, climate justice. So they read your mind on this one. So thank you very much indeed to Ilham, to Scott, to Philippe, and to Eckart. It's nice to meet you all, even if it's virtually and we're not sitting on stools in the hotel in Brussels at the Brussels Forum. But thank you all very much indeed at this very critical time, 5 months before we hope there is a meeting of COP26 in November in Glasgow, but it's still a bit in doubt as to whether it'll be physical, virtual, and in Glasgow. You didn't hear it from me, but there are signs that they're having to rethink about how they managed to do this, particularly with the pandemic. So thank you all very much indeed. Look forward to meeting you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.